Slap, slap, slap. A woman was walking down the street at midnight when she heard a slap, slap, slap sound behind her. She looked around, but there was no one there. She went on walking only to again hear the slap, slap, slap. Again, she looked around to find no one there. She was frightened and ran to the bus stop. The slap, slap, slap followed close on her heels. As she sat on the bus, everything was silent. When she reached her stop and got off the bus, she heard the slap, slap, slap sound again. She looked around, but there was still no one there. The woman was now terribly frightened. All the way home, slap, slap, slap. Up the stairs, slap, slap, slap. As she stood at the door of her apartment, fumbling for her keys, she saw a man in a black cloak coming up the stairs. The man looked at her strangely and said, "In my opinion, the heel came off your sandals." The Rare Book is a story about a boy who loves to read. There was a young boy who loved to read books. He read everything he could get his hands on, and loved going to his favorite bookstore and browsing throughout the new titles. One day, the boy realized that he had read everything the store had to offer. He confronted the owner and asked him if he had anything else. The owner looked at him gravely and said, "Yes. Yes, I do." He reached behind the counter and pulled out an old book. Dusting off the cover, he showed it to the boy. The cover had a picture of a grotesque face, and the title at the top read "The Book of Death." The owner said that it was an extremely rare book. "How much is it?" asked the boy eagerly. The owner said that the rare book was worth almost $2,000, but he would gladly sell it to the boy at a discounted price of $199. The young boy scrimped and saved for weeks until he had enough money to buy the book. He ran down to the bookstore and threw his money on the counter. The owner handed over the rare book to the delighted boy. However, as the boy was leaving with his new purchase, the owner warned him never to read the first page. The boy went home and opened the book. He made sure to skip the first page, carefully closing his eyes as he flipped the page over. He spent the rest of the evening reading. The book was mildly interesting, and he was content with his purchase. However, for days afterwards, he always wondered what could be on that first page. It was always in the back of his mind. One day, the temptation was too much for the boy. He flipped to the very front of the book and looked at the first page. Suddenly, he dropped the book in horror. There, in bold print, were the words, "Recommended retail price, $1.99. The Hot Air Balloon is a scary story about a boy who won a prize in a competition of a ride in a hot air balloon. A young boy was reading his town's local newspaper when he came across an announcement for a competition. They were giving away a number of prizes. First prize was a hot air balloon ride, second prize was a bungee jump, and third prize was an electric toaster. The boy had always wanted to fly in a hot air balloon. He dreamed of climbing up into the clear blue sky, soaring high above the clouds and following the breeze wherever it took him. Filled with excitement, he cut the entry form out of the newspaper, quickly filled it in and sent it off in the mail. A few weeks later, when the winners were announced, the boy couldn't believe his luck. He had won first prize: the hot air balloon ride. It was like a dream come true. He could hardly wait. The morning that the flight was to take place finally arrived, and his parents dropped him off at a large field on the outskirts of town. It was filled with hot air balloons, and people were walking around, making last-minute adjustments and getting ready to take off. An instructor in a blue jumpsuit was there to greet him. He led the boy over to one of the hot air balloons and told him to hop in. Just as they were preparing to take off, the instructor got a call on his mobile phone. "Hold on, I've got to take this," he said to the boy. "It could be important. I'll be back in a few minutes. Don't go anywhere." With that, the instructor jumped out of the hot air balloon and walked briskly over to the side of the field where the cars and vans were parked. The boy stood waiting in the basket for a long time, watching the other hot air balloons take off and climb into the sky. He began to wonder what was taking the instructor so long. Just then, a man who was dressed in a blue suit approached him and asked, "Are you ready to take off?" "I don't know," replied the boy. "I'm waiting for the instructor. He said he'd be back soon." "Oh, he's gone," said the man. "His wife was in an accident or something. He sent me to replace him." "So are you ready to take off?" I guess so," said the boy, stepping back. The man climbed into the basket and began loosening the ropes. After struggling impatiently with the knots for a minute or two, he muttered, "We don't have time for this. We're already behind schedule." He took a small knife out of his pocket and quickly sliced through the ropes. The balloon suddenly took off and the boy was nearly knocked off his feet as it swiftly ascended into the air. "That's more like it," laughed the man. Up we go. A few seconds later, the basket stopped jerking around and righted itself, soaring smoothly into the sky. The boy listened with great interest as the instructor pointed out all of the controls to him. "This here is the gigawatt multiplier and it connects to the manifold distributor," he said with an air of authority. "If you want to go up, you just pump the flux capacitor here, and if you want to go left and right, you tug on the umbilical cords over there." As they passed over the town, the instructor began to grow a little uneasy. "Do you think they can see us from down there?" he inquired anxiously. The boy looked over the side. "Yes, I'm sure they can," he replied. The man shook his head. "No, I mean, can they see our faces? Can they recognize us?" "Of course not," said the boy, suspecting it was a trick question. "We're too high up." "Not high enough," said the man. He seemed to be very agitated and kept repeating, "I hope they don't see me, I hope they don't see me." The boy wondered what was wrong with him. A minute later, the man picked up one of the sandbags. "This is ballast," he explained. "It's what's keeping us down. We want to go up, up, up." He dropped the sandbag he was holding over the side and then began throwing out the other sandbags, left and right. The balloon began to rise slowly. Up, 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 it soared into the clouds. Then the man pulled off his coat and tossed it overboard. That lightened her, he shouted triumphantly, but it's still not enough. "We need to go higher, higher, higher." He began loosening his tie. The boy was shocked and didn't know what to think. "Nobody can recognize you at this distance, even if they had a telescope," he said. "Don't be too sure of that," replied the man. "They have sharp eyes at the home." "At where?" asked the boy. "At the mental home," the man shouted. At that moment, the boy's heart skipped a beat. A chill went down his spine as the horrible truth dawned on him. He was all alone in a hot air balloon with an escaped mental patient. For a few seconds, the boy struggled to make sense of the situation. The maniac kept repeating his insane cries of "higher, higher, higher," as he took off his clothes and threw them out into the wind. When he finally tossed his socks over the side, the man stood there stark naked and said, "We're not high enough yet. We need to be about 10,000 miles higher." The escaped lunatic picked up the last sandbag and heaved it over the side. The balloon rose slightly, but the maniac still wasn't satisfied and again began to mutter to himself, deep in thought. The boy was eyeing him nervously and had broken out into a cold sweat. He was desperately wishing that this was all a nightmare, and that he would wake up and find himself safe and sound in his own bed. "I know," the man suddenly cried. "There's nothing else for it. One of us will just have to throw the other one out." The boy couldn't believe what was happening. When he saw the sparkle in the madman's eyes, it chilled him to the bone. "Have you got a wife and children?" the man asked, abruptly. Thinking quickly, the boy said that he was married and had 14 young kids who depended on him for everything. "Ha ha 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 ha," laughed the maniac. "I have 300 wives and 5,000 children," he declared, proudly. "And I have to get home to them in time to cook their dinner." The terrified boy decided that the only way out of this situation was to humor the crazed man. Playing for time, he asked, "And where do they live?" "On the moon," replied the maniac as he suddenly grabbed the young boy around the hips, lifted him up and tossed him over the side. Make-A-Wish is a story for kids about a young girl who meets the devil and is granted 3 wishes. There was a girl named Veruca Snot who was very badly behaved. Her parents couldn't control her, and she was always causing problems. At school, she bullied all of the other kids and beat them up. She had no friends and everyone in her class hated her. One morning, Veruca was on her way to school when a strange man stepped out of the bushes and blocked her path. The man was dressed in black from head to toe, and his eyes glowed with an unearthly light. "Who are you?" asked Veruca. "Well, I have many names," the man replied with a sly smile. "Some call me Beelzebub. Others know me as Belial, Old Nick, or Lucifer. You probably know me as Satan." "Oh yeah," sneered Veruca. "Prove it." "All right," said the devil. "I will grant you 3 wishes in return for your everlasting soul." Veruca thought hard for a minute, then shrugged her shoulders and said, "Okay, it's a deal." "What is your first wish?" asked the devil. "Well, I've read stories like this before," said Veruca. "When people are granted wishes, they usually end up getting screwed, but I'm too smart for that. So, for my first wish, I wish for unlimited wishes." The devil raised his eyebrows. "Very smart," he said. "Your wish is granted." "I know," replied Veruca with a cheeky grin. "What is your second wish?" asked the devil. For my second wish, I wish I was a millionaire," she said. "And I mean a millionaire in American dollars, so no tricks with some weird foreign currencies." The devil smirked. "I think you're too quick-witted for me," he said. "Your wish is granted." Veruca opened her school bag and found it packed to overflowing with bundles of cash. "Excellent," she cried. "Okay, for my next wish, I want to be the most popular girl in school." "Your wish is granted," said the devil. Just then, she heard the school bell ringing in the distance. "Oh no," shouted Veruca. "Look what you've done. You've made me late for school. Now the teacher is going to give me detention for sure. Oh, I wish I was dead." And then, suddenly, she was. Skeleton in the Closet is a scary story about human remains found in a building that is about to be torn down. A very large, old building was being torn down to make room for a new skyscraper. Due to its proximity to other buildings, it could not be imploded and had to be dismantled floor by floor. While working on the 49th floor, 2 construction workers found a human skeleton in a small closet behind the elevator shaft. They decided that they should call the police. When the police arrived, the workers led them to the closet and showed them the skeleton. It was fully clothed, covered in cobwebs and dust, and sitting in a crouched position. They all found the sight of this skeleton disturbing and wondered who it could have been and how they wound up in the closet. The police forensics team removed the body, and demolition of the building was put on hold until the police figured out the identity of the corpse. 2 days went by and the construction workers were becoming impatient. They couldn't stand it anymore. They had to know who they had found. They called the police and said, "We are the 2 guys who found the skeleton in the closet, and we want to know who it was." The policeman said, "It's somebody kind of important." "Well, who was it?" they asked. The policeman replied, "The 1956 National Hide and Seek champion." The Big Man is a spooky story for children about a young boy who has a frightening encounter in his bedroom. There was a young boy named William who lived in a small village. He was a nervous child and was often afraid of one thing or another. He was quiet and spent most of his time listening to other people's conversations. In the village where he lived, he would often hear people talking about the big man, "Behave yourself or the big man will take you away," he heard a mother say to her child. "Go to bed or the big man will come and get you," said another parent. "Don't go over there, that's where the big man lives," he overheard a father telling his daughter. William began to wonder who this big man was and why kids needed to be afraid of him. One dark night, as William lay sleeping in bed, he heard his bedroom door slowly creak open. There, in the doorway, stood the shadowy figure of a man. He was over 6 feet tall, and he had the ugliest face William had ever seen. The big man was tall and fat. He had a scar down the side of his face, and one of his eyes was milky white. The big man silently walked over to William's bed and leaned down. In a commanding tone, the big man said, "Get up." William replied in a trembling voice, "I will not get up." "Get up or I'll kill you," the big man threatened. William got out of bed. "Get dressed," said the big man. "I will not get dressed," replied William. "Get dressed or I'll kill you." William got dressed. "Now, come with me," commanded the big man. "I will not go with you," said William. "Come with me or I'll kill you." William followed the big man down the stairs and out the front door. There was a large, black car parked outside. The big man grabbed William by the scruff of the neck and tossed him into the back seat. Then he got in, started the engine and drove off. They drove through the streets of the little village and out into the countryside. The black car hurtled down the little country roads until they were in the middle of nowhere. Suddenly, the big man pulled over to the side of the road and stopped. William looked out the window and saw that they had stopped outside a cemetery. The big man grabbed William and bundled him out of the car. He dragged the frightened boy through the cemetery gates and down a narrow path until they came to a grave. The big man picked up a shovel and tossed it at William's feet. "Dig up the grave," he growled. "I will not dig up the grave," said William. "Dig up the grave or I'll kill you." William picked up the shovel and began digging. After almost an hour, he unearthed a coffin and stopped to regain his breath. "Take out the dead body," growled the big man. "I will not," said William. "Take it out or I'll kill you." William opened the coffin and lifted out the dead body. It was the corpse of an old man, and his face was moldy and rotten. There were maggots crawling out of his mouth, nose, and eye sockets. "Now, eat it," ordered the big man. "I will not," said William. "Eat it or I'll kill you." William shuddered and reluctantly began to eat the dead body. He started nibbling on the ear. Then, he bit into the cheek. The taste made him gag. Suddenly, William felt someone grabbing him by the shoulder and shaking him. "William, wake up," said his mother. "That's the third mattress you've eaten." This is a funny story about a scary story told around the campfire. A few years ago, I was a camp counselor. Every Halloween, we would take a group of kids on a trip to Lake Arrowhead. After we pitched our tents, we always built a campfire at the edge of the lake and sat around all night telling ghost stories. The kids were all boys and girls aged between 12 and 14. As the stories started, I could never imagine the nightmare it would bring for one young boy in particular. One of the kids started telling a scary story about a deranged killer with a huge machete who went around stalking campers. As he told his gruesome story, everyone cuddled closer together. One by one, all of the characters in his story fell victim to the machete-wielding maniac. As the tension mounted and the story came to a really scary part, the boy who was telling the story suddenly let out a loud yell. It shattered the silence, and suddenly everyone was screaming. Then the kids realized that they had been fooled, and everybody started laughing. However, one young boy suddenly jumped out of his seat and started running away into the darkness. Since I was the camp counselor, I had to chase after him. I yelled out as he raced towards the lake. I thought he was going to stop at the water's edge, but he didn't. He plunged into the lake as I watched. All I could do was yell, "Stop." In the darkness, I hurried towards the spot where he had plunged in. The other kids watched in shock as I dove in after him. The water was only 4 feet deep, but it was freezing cold. I grabbed him by the collar and pulled him out of the water. He was drenched from head to toe. Someone brought a blanket and put it around him as we walked back to the campfire. Once he had dried off, I took him aside to talk to him and see why he had been so terrified by the story. He said that he wasn't frightened by the story. But the storyteller's sudden yell caught him off guard and he had accidentally peed his pants. He didn't want to be embarrassed in front of everyone, so thinking quickly, he ran off and jumped into the water to hide the wet patch. Who's the boss? There was a young girl who went to summer camp. She was very unpopular with the other children because she was extremely bossy and selfish. After a few days, the other kids refused to speak to her and asked the counselors to move her to another cabin. The counselors put her in a cabin on her own. It was known as the haunted cabin. On the first night she slept there, the girl took out a marker and wrote on the wall, "I'm the boss." Then, she went to bed. In the middle of the night, she felt something crawling up her sheets. Soft hands wrapped around her neck and strangled her. In the morning, the counselors came in and found the girl lying dead in her bed. On the wall above her was the inscription, "No, I'm the boss."
The Halloween Cemetery is a scary story about a group of teenagers who play with a Ouija board in a graveyard on Halloween night. The story goes that, a few years ago, a group of friends planned to spend Halloween in a cemetery close to where they lived. There were 2 boys, named Carlos and Miguel, and 2 girls named Paula and Rocio. They were all 16 years old. Initially, when they heard the idea, the girls refused to go. Paula said she had a bad feeling about it. However, the boys managed to convince them to change their minds. Finally, Halloween night arrived and the teenagers met at Miguel's house and drove to the cemetery together. When they arrived, there was so much fog that they could hardly see. The cemetery gates were locked. Standing outside, they heard strange and eerie sounds coming from the graveyard. The girls were scared and suggested that they go home. Rocio said that she regretted agreeing to the idea in the first place because she had a feeling that something terrible was going to happen, but the boys refused to let them leave. "Don't be a baby," scoffed Miguel. "We didn't travel this far to just look at the cemetery gates and go home. It's Halloween. Devil's Night." Carlos was about to climb over the cemetery gates, but when he grabbed hold of the metal bars, the gates swung open in front of him with an ominous creak. Suddenly, they heard the bells of the nearby chapel striking midnight. In the distance, a dog howled and the moon was obscured by clouds. The wind rose up and began to whistle through the trees. Miguel took a Ouija board out from under his coat. "It's time to summon the spirits," he said with a mischievous grin. "Don't worry, it's just a game," said Carlos, trying to reassure the 2 girls. "Nothing will happen. There's nothing to be scared of." The group of teenagers walked into the cemetery and when they reached a small tomb in the middle, they stopped. Miguel laid the Ouija board on top of the cold stone and they all gathered around it. They placed their fingers on the planchette and Miguel called out to the spirits to contact them. After a few minutes, the pointer began to move and they made contact with a spirit. It claimed to be the ghost of a girl named Sarita who was buried in the cemetery. The boys and girls asked the spirit many questions and the answers were spelled out on the board. All of a sudden, Rocio felt something cold and clammy grab hold of her wrist. She let out a horrified scream. The teenagers were spooked and decided to end the game, but the spirit of the girl told them not to. The spirit said they had to keep playing or everyone would die. Miguel ignored the spirit's warning and snapped the Ouija board shut. They were about to leave when it suddenly became very dark. The teenagers could barely see anything in the cemetery. A strong wind rose and it blew through the tombstones. Statues fell from their perches and shattered on the ground. When she saw this, Rocio freaked out and began to run. She couldn't see anything and stumbled blindly through the darkness. She accidentally tripped and fell into an open grave. She landed on her head and broke her neck. Carlos ran out through the cemetery gates and stumbled into the road. Suddenly, a car came around the corner and slammed into him, killing him instantly and squashing his body into a bloody mess. Paula and Miguel managed to get back to the safety of their homes. Paula was so scared that she decided to take a bath to calm herself down before she went to bed. However, when she was getting into the tub, she accidentally bumped into her cell phone and knocked it into the water. Unfortunately, her phone was plugged into the charger and Paula was electrocuted. The next morning, Miguel woke up and went downstairs for breakfast. His parents were waiting for him and broke the bad news. Miguel was surprised and frightened to learn of the deaths of all his friends. He knew he was next, but he didn't know what to do. Fearing for his life, he was desperate to get away. He went straight to the airport and took the first flight to Argentina. He was shaking with fear, but he managed to board the plane without any incident. However, when the plane took off, the engines failed and it crashed into the sea. His body was never recovered. Legend has it that, after these incidents, no one ever again dared to visit the cemetery on Halloween night.